Well, good morning, folks. First, I want to just apologize for the fact that we are delayed the way we are. We had some technical issues. We do apologize for that. I do want to say right off the bat that we are going to be going over a lot of stuff today. We are going to be talking about CNN defending demonic and satanic activity, particularly as it relates to children. We are going to talk about the Lord doing an incredible work in the lives of people who are beginning to take a stand for righteousness. We're going to talk about that for a few minutes. We are going to have a conversation today about the nation of Israel and the sleeping giant that they are, that is literally awakening. And folks, I'm going to just say this. You do not want to wake up this sleeping giant. This is a sleeping giant you don't want to tick off. But unfortunately, that seems to be the case. That seems to be what's happening. We're also going to talk about a statement that the president made regarding Ukraine. All of his assertions regarding Ukraine are absolutely ridiculous, but some of them are more telling than others. And we're basically going to talk about his claim or his assertion that Ukraine should not be going into NATO, right? That it is not ready for NATO. Well, there's a reason why they're not ready for NATO, according to the president's mind, and that is because his handlers continue to understand the detrimental effects of what would happen if they joined NATO. But that's a whole other issue, and that's something that we'll definitely talk about a little bit later. Very interesting stuff there. So we've got a lot of stuff that we're going to be talking about. I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation, and we've got a lot of stuff happening. So, Busted Beak, that is really funny. You say, I need to be your technical guy. Just kidding. I can't even find my cell phone half the time. Take care, brothers. Yeah, I have to tell you, you guys don't know, many of you already know this, but I have a very heavy technical background, and the kind of technical errors that we have, at least the ones that we faced this morning, for most people would be the type that would end the show. We wouldn't even do it, but I've dealt with stuff like this so many times that it's just really easy to get it fixed on the fly, even though it's not the preferable way of doing it. At least we're getting the show out, doing exactly what it is that we need to do. So it's kind of interesting to think about this. I do want to stop for just a moment, and I want to talk about a few issues that I think are critical. Now, we're going to go back to Israel in a minute. We are going to reflect upon an interview that took place with Bibi Netanyahu. I think that interview is going to be, there's going to be some interesting stuff that came out of that interview that we will focus on. I know Monkey and I talked about this a little bit, and we highlighted some of these things in the interview. I'm going to get a little bit more at length regarding that today, which should be a lot of fun as we talk about this sleeping giant that is about to be literally awakened. And when it wakes up, it's not going to be pretty. It's going to be ugly. And the rest of the world doesn't realize it because of their hardened hearts. But boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, this one is going to be a crazy one, folks. And I'm telling you this right now, if they don't wisen up, if the world does not wisen up, we are going to have a bona fide massive problem on our hands. And it will be at the helm of the United States of America and many others bringing it to the table, which is terribly ugly, but it is indeed true. So let me get into those of you that are on YouTube and Instagram supporting us. Thank you so much. You guys are awesome. I do want to just mention that. You guys have been such a blessing supporting us on Locals with the recent videos that we've been doing. Lots of great stuff that we've got on tap for today. On tap is like a beer reference. We're not drinking beer. I don't drink beer. I don't drink alcohol. Anyway, Mr. Red, thank you so much. You say, almost wrecked this morning listening to your Sunday service on Matthew 25 at the beginning when you messed up your words. I laughed so hard. That sleep deprivation. Great message, though. I don't remember what words I messed up. Do you remember what words I messed? I think I identified I messed up some words, but I don't remember what I said. That's pretty funny. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Red. We love you. And, of course, I already read Busted Beak's comment. You guys, I'm really bothered. And I want to talk about one area that is particularly bothering me. We've talked about this before, and I will mention this again, and I will continue to mention this, but I hate the exploitation of children. Look, let's just face this, right? when a godless society becomes even more godless, what they do is they exploit two age groups. The first age group that they exploit is they exploit the elderly. And the reason why they exploit the elderly and seek to destroy the elderly and take advantage of the elderly is because the elderly has two very important assets for society that helps to keep civilization where it should be as God intended it. The first asset that they have is they have what I like to call institutional memory. The elderly remember the accounts of history, and even in the events that happened much before their time, their understanding of history is oftentimes a lot better, because as a society continues to degrade, you have to understand the fact that the way history is communicated changes. And so the way history has been communicated back in those days is a lot better, and it's certainly a lot more accurate than the way it's communicated today, because back in those days, they were more of a God-centered society as opposed to a godless society. Shelley Berg, thank you so much. I don't know if I'd be able to talk about it today, but I can just, you know what? Remind me near the end of the show, and I can talk to you about where we can kind of get a summary on this and where you can get the Bible studies that I just taught on this subject in the book of James. So I'll go and do that. So that's the first reason. The first reason is they have institutional memory. The elderly remember things that most people will never remember. Why? Because they were either there or they were close to people that were there. So when a story is retold, it is accurate when it comes from the elderly. Almost always it is more accurate when it comes from the elderly. And this is why totalitarian regimes seek to exploit the elderly, because in their desire to exploit the elderly, what they are doing is they are wanting to destroy any type of method or tool or ability or safeguard or gatekeeper that will keep history accurate. It's incredibly important for a totalitarian regime to have the ability to be able to rewrite history, and the rewriting of that history to be uncontested. When you begin to see patterns emerge in the United States of America that are indicative of what happened in Nazi Germany, or are indicative of what happened to the Japanese internment camps that took place earlier in our nation, when elderly people are given the floor to be able to communicate, they, in their understanding of history, will be able to say, we are repeating a pattern that will destroy us, and we are repeating a pattern that will destroy other people, and we are repeating a pattern that will lead us into a totalitarian regime. Totalitarian rulers hate that. Satan hates it. Satan does not want the elderly to be able to recall history, because if you can recall history and you even have a reasonable amount of reactionary prowess, then you will be able to keep it from repeating itself by simply changing the direction that you are going in right now. So this is one reason why the elderly are hated. The other reason why the elderly are loathed and hated by totalitarian rulers, and this is very important to understand, is because the elderly have something that the younger generation does not have, and this is critical to grasp. The elderly have wisdom. They have incredible wisdom. They have the type of wisdom that is beyond the capacity of younger generations that exist within a society. And with that wisdom comes not only a massive responsibility of being able to educate the younger generation in how to apply their knowledge using the power of that wisdom, but it is that wisdom that creates an accountability mechanism that keeps encapsulated within a society righteousness that will continue to protect a nation. But when you have a totalitarian ruler that wants to continue to make money off the death of the future, to have crack and whore parties in the place in which they abode that the American taxpayer actually pays for, And to continue to do the evil that he does, he has to be able to eliminate the elderly population, even though he himself is an elderly man, because he is a sellout willing to continue to do whatever is necessary in order to destroy the future for his own benefit. For those of you that would look at a president like the current president that we have in office right now and lay any other level of sophistication upon him, let me just explain this to you. This is very important and very simple. It comes down to one aspect and one aspect only, and that is the fact that this man is a selfish man who is in it for himself and does not care about the future of this nation. There may have been a time where he did care, but if he did, I can tell you this right now, it still would have been for the benefit of himself. He has no regard for the truth. He has no regard for righteousness. He has no regard for any godly or biblical wisdom. He is an ungodly, demonically inspired, unrighteous man. So the elderly are attacked. This is something that's a given. We know that. The elderly are exploited in a godless society, and we are seeing plenty of evidence of the elderly being exploited, not only in the United States of America, but all over the world where totalitarian regimes are emerging. Let me make myself very clear here. I think this is very important for us to understand. It's very important for us to know and to realize. That's number one. Number two, I think perhaps one of the most significant people groups that continue to be exploited by totalitarian rulers in totalitarian regimes happens to be children. They target children through abortions. They target children through the exploitation of all kinds of sexual deviation, and they continue to destroy the lives of children. And the bottom line about this is they do it because they have a very specific purpose behind their exploitation. The closer they get to the heart of the devil, the closer they get to the mechanisms of exploitation that the devil loves to use, and the more they continue to do that, the faster they degrade a society. Think about it like this, folks. If you can convince a woman that it's okay to abort a baby, then you have taken away from that woman the strongest form of human premonition that exists in the moment of conception until birth. If you can convince a mom that it is okay to murder a baby in the womb, that mom will lose her will to protect her children when she has children, if she has children. If a society is okay with watching children being killed in the mother's womb, and in many cases outside of the mother's womb, then understand society will be okay with the exploitation of children because they try to kill a baby in its most vulnerable state. It's a very simple issue. And the reason why totalitarian rulers love to exploit children, and this is very important, they love to exploit children because they know that if they can effectively exploit a child, that means they have already gotten the child's parents to give up. They have gotten the children's parents to walk away for standing up for what is right for their children's interest. I was confronted with a situation recently where I was forced to act upon a circumstance that I perceived as being threatening to one of my children. And as Victor Marx would put it, the dangerous gentleman in me came out. I did not do anything wrong. I did not do anything unethical. I did not do anything unbiblical. I certainly didn't do anything illegal. But I opened my mouth and I spoke firmly to put a particular action to a stop, because I have an obligation as the parent of my precious children to defend them at all costs. The problem is this: if I can, as a government official, make it okay in the mind of a parent to watch their children being exploited, I can promise you this, then anything goes. If I can force you to put something inside of a child that you have no idea what effect it might have on that child, then in essence, I win. If I can subject a child to all kinds of evil and wicked manipulation without society even speaking up about it, then I win. What do you think they're doing with the border, folks? Do you understand that the conceded to number, the number that was released by the Department of Justice, which I promise you the number is way higher because the Department of Justice is really the Department of Injustice. They are a bunch of corrupt devils. Don't get me started on Mayorkas. Don't get me started on the leader of justice. Homeland leader is corrupt. The leader of Department of Justice is even more corrupt. Merrick Garland is a devil, a literal devil, who belongs in jail for treason. Now, I want to make this very clear because this is very important. I want you to understand that when organizations like the Department of Justice place more of an emphasis on arresting parents that are standing up for their children who are being exploited in a public school, when they place more of an emphasis on that than they are child trafficking, you've got a problem. Let me go back to what I was going to say. This number is conceded to by a corrupt Department of Justice. As a matter of fact, the number comes from the Department of Justice. But did you know that over 80,000 kids so far this year have disappeared from the border? You talk about you don't like kids being in cages and so on and so forth, you big fat hypocrites. Even though you're okay with kids being exploited in ways that are unimaginable to most people in society, you say that's okay. But you're going to get mad that kids are in cages that Obama created? Think about that for a second. You are kicking and screaming and freaking out because a child is separated from their parent because of an immigration custody situation. Yet you have no problem with the fact that the more you continue to open a border to allow people to come in illegally, the more of an open door you create for things like the cartels, these people coming out of Sinaloa and other parts of South America, exploiting children at rates that are far beyond the capacity of most people to be able to understand. Does anybody see the problem with that? Does anybody see the issue with this? Does anybody realize how insane of a mindset that is? We just had a movie that got released. Pay attention to this, folks. It's called The Sound of Freedom. I believe it's called The Sound of Freedom. Jim Caviezel is in this movie with Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson is obviously the person who put it together. I have seen clips of the movie before it was actually released. I have spent some time looking at the materialization of the plot as they were beginning to develop it. And I can tell you this right now, I may not recommend a 16-year-old or under going to watch the movie, but I would recommend anybody going to watch the movie because the movie actually creates awareness within people to understand what's really going on. We may be in the process very soon of getting permission to play the movie at our church. We hope that we'll be able to do that so that we can take a stand against these issues of child exploitation that continue. These things that are happening are evil. This movie, by the way, is legitimate. Let me just simply say this. We have people that go to our church who do everything from local investigations as police officers to federal investigations as federal agents, all of whom participate in this work every day, day in and day out. They are seeking to bring charges against child exploiters, and they say the same thing. This movie is good because it brings awareness into an area that they contend for, but it does not show how terribly bad it is. And most people that watch this movie recognize that this is terrible beyond their capacity to be able to fathom or understand. But the movie brought awareness to them. And the guys that are investigating it, including me, who's been involved in a series of investigations early on when I worked for the police department, I can tell you this right now, it's an ugly, satanically inspired world out there. The darkness that goes on with child exploitation, the wickedness that you continue to see happening that goes on in that arena is beyond the capacity of most people's darkness or awareness of darkness, because it's a type of darkness that most people never see. Think about that for just a second. Very, very important. By the way, I do want to make a statement about something that I saw. Remind me, Dale, to make a statement about statement that I saw about somebody talking about 501c3s, because that is kind of an important thing. I don't think most people realize this, but churches don't need to get 501c3 access. All churches need to do is file as regular, understanding that by statute they're exempt. That's a whole other issue. Someone brought up a question about that. I might talk about that later if I have time. That's a whole other issue. So there's a lot of exploitation going on right now. People are not aware of it. They don't know how bad this is. People don't realize how dark it's actually getting. People do not know how ugly this is. They don't. Most people will never be exposed to even 1/100th or 1/1000th of the darkness that is exhibited in child exploitation from day to day. I laugh all the time at people that take a run at men like Victor Marx. It's very important. I think it's pretty critical, like really, really critical. I think that we should, on a regular basis, stop for one moment to reflect upon how the enemy works. One of his most powerful and effective tactics, is to basically get you to think that the evil that's going on in this world really isn't all of a big deal. So think about this for 1 second. I want people to understand where we're going and where this is moving. This is kind of critical, okay? The more unaware you can become of a matter at this level, then the more effective the exploiters become. It's a very important thing to think through. It's something that a lot of people don't necessarily consider. Bart Jen, thank you. And yes, very appropriate with Matthew 18. This is kind of interesting to think this through, guys. Think it through for just a second. The enemy is so good at minimizing these issues. It's really important to understand this. He also uses agents. Should I just say this? He uses agents in the mainstream media to get you to justify being ignorant of these matters. And he even minimizes the brevity of the issues that are actually being put in front of us. And he does it very well through these mainstream media people. The picture that I'm going to show you, I'm talking about all of this because the picture that I'm going to show you, or the video, is part of a box office review that gets done, and I'm going to show you the first 30 seconds of this review that CNN actually puts out. I want to warn you, what you're about to see is highly demonic. What you're about to see is terribly wicked. It is beyond most people's capacity to be able to understand. But my assertion is they come against movies like this Chaviezel movie because they themselves function as people who support the exploitation of children. They have demonstrated that already. They defend the drag queens in the libraries. They defend the exploitation of children through the trans contagion. And it continues to happen. Look what it says here. Look at what they're saying. This is very bad, guys. I'm telling you, this is terrible. Listen to what they say.
These films are created out of moral panics. They're created out of bogus statistics. They're created out of fear. And with something like Sound of Freedom, it specifically is looking at QAnon concepts of these child trafficking rings that are run by the high-level elites, and only people like Tim Ballard and only people like Jim Caviezel, and by extension, only people like the ticket buyer can help bring these trafficking rings down. So there's a very participatory element. You're not just going to see a movie, you're just killing 2 hours on a hot day. You are helping bring down these pedophile rings and save children. Now, it's not true, but it's a very comforting and it's a very warm feeling to have.
Isn't that evil? Isn't that dark beyond most people's capacity to be able to contemplate or understand? Isn't that insane? Do you understand that they are coming against a movie that is actually exposing the darkness and getting people to reconsider how they look at things like open borders? Isn't that amazing that they do that? And by the way, if you think that this guy is, sort of innocent of what he's doing, if you watch this clip in its entirety and you actually took some time to look at what was going on, understand that in this clip, it was actually being leading. The lady was leading this. I should show you what was actually said by the folks when they asked him this question. They started the question by saying, "This is QAnon." Really? Folks, Vin Dog points it out correctly. Thank you, by the way, Vin. He says, the Sound of Freedom killed the woke Indiana Jones movie by a landslide at the box office. And that's why these evildoers are angry. I'm going to take it a step further, Vin. I think you're right. I think that they are even more angry because it is revealing the wickedness that continues to happen. It's revealing the darkness that continues to propagate itself. This is so incredibly evil. They're angry because they're being busted. They're angry because they're being exposed. They're angry because they know they're wrong. They know they're walking in darkness. They know they're walking evil. But they just don't care. They have no concern for the things that are right or wrong. They have no respect for any of those things. And they haven't for a very, very long time. I wish people would understand the brevity of this, guys. I wish people would recognize just how dark things are getting. I wish people would look at this for just one moment and use this as a sign to wake them up. If we could just do that for just a moment, if we could just stop for just one moment and just say, what in the world are they supporting? Why is this actually even happening? Why are we in a place today where we just say, hey, you know what? We'll just let it slide. What in the world is going on? Folks, please understand. please understand that the enemy is good at what he does? Can you please understand that? Can you please recognize, please, 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 watch closely. Watch closely. Folks, understand that they are rewriting history. Understand that there's going to come to a point where if they are successful in what they are doing, they are going to blind the eyes and the hearts and the minds of the people that sit within society to think in their mind that no such thing could ever happen and nothing has ever happened. And thus history will repeat itself. Wickedness will repeat itself. Now, I had to speak about this because I thought it was really important. I think it was like critical for me to talk about this because when I saw this clip that got shared with me, by the way, online, I saw it online first, and then Charlie Kirk shared it again this morning, and that's why I had to bring it up. But my original reason for wanting to do this monologue today was to talk about the condition of the nation of Israel and to talk about what was actually going on there. Because if you've not been paying attention over the weekend, we have seen some news emerge that's just unbelievable. Lebanon has fired on Israel. We actually think that it is a less experienced organization than Hezbollah, not directly supported by Lebanon with respect to their firing on Israel. But we know that a terrorist organization has fired upon Israel from within Lebanon. Israel is still doing the due diligence to understand where it's coming from and where it came from. And that's kind of a side note here. But you have the international community that is frowning upon Israel for actually taking a stand in wanting to do the right thing in defending her nation. They are beginning to and trying to actively rewrite history with respect to what has happened in Israel. This is something that they are good at doing, and it's something that they've been doing for quite some time. And quite frankly, their father, the devil, has helped them do it quite well. But the truth of the matter is, when people try to rewrite history, there are always going to be a remnant of individuals who can tell you what the real history of the nation of Israel is. And I think that it's appropriate before we get into the media nonsense that's happening with Israel, that we get into a conversation, a portion of a conversation that I saw between Bibi Netanyahu and Jordan Peterson. Now, I think this is important. Bibi Netanyahu, in one of the most articulate ways I've heard him do it in a very long time, and he's very good at doing this with this particular subject, describes to us how they have tried to rewrite history, or how they have tried to rewrite the history of the nation of Israel. What he says here is insightful, and it is undoubtedly worth us taking the time to analyze his words and to have a conversation about what's actually being said. Because this is critical. This is extremely critical. This is extraordinarily critical. I don't want you to lose sight of the bigger picture here. There is a sleeping giant that's being awoken, and we need to be aware of it because the geopolitics in the region of the Middle East are about to change, and they're going to change dramatically, folks. They have already had a series of changes, but we are going to see it get even more crazy shortly. So let's pay attention to what Bibi Netanyahu says, because, folks, I'm just telling you this right now. The message being communicated by him right now is powerful and effective, and a lot of people do not want to hear this. People who are anti-Israel and people who are anti-God have no desire to see these principles being communicated because these principles are true and the power of what's being communicated is significant. So let's listen to what Bibi has to say, because this is an important one.
The Mamluks, the Ottomans, ultimately the British, a series of conquerors. In other words, they took over the land, lost the land, and did nothing with the land. So if they had done what you say, if they had created, if that house that we were expelled from was taken over by another people, another family, they built a family there. They had children, grandchildren. They extended the porch. They built a parking garage and so on. It's gone. What can you do? You still have the ability to demand reclamations, compensation, and so on. But, tough luck. That happens in history. But that's not what happened. Once the Jews were conquered by the Arabs did nothing with it, lost the land to others. Now we come back and bring it back to life 13 centuries later and perform this miracle. And they fabricate a history where we were there all the time. It was a verdant homeland. It was built up. It was nothing of the kind. It was desert. It was nothing. Now, it's not merely Mark Twain and Arthur Penryn Stanley who say.
By the way, he's not lying about that. Okay, understand, none of what he's saying is incorrect. It's all true, what he's saying. It's all true. Take a listen. I'm going to rewind just to give you some more context, but what he says here is incredibly important for you guys to grasp. Okay, take a listen.
Desert. It was nothing. Now, it's not merely Mark Twain and Arthur Penryn Stanley who say that. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of travelogues over the centuries of famous French poets, of Swiss travelers, of German theologians, everybody, of poets, writers, travelers, who describe exactly the same thing. There was nothing there. There was no Palestinian state. There were no Palestinians. They didn't even, the Arabs even didn't call themselves that. They were calling themselves parts of southern Syria.
Yeah, by the way, I just want to say this, and he's right about this. Arabs were never, we say Arabs, the Arabs were never ever calling themselves Palestinians. Do you understand the fact that the name Palestinian was a name that was given by one of the later Roman emperors to Jews as a way of demeaning them? He referred to them by their enemies, which is why he called them Palestina. That's why he said, that's where the name Palestinian comes from. So even the name Palestinian originally refers to a Jew. People don't know that because they don't study history. And when they do study history, they study the wrong history. They study the untruthful history. Quick note on this. My mom and my dad were both born and raised in Egypt. My father's mother, who was a pastor's wife, of course, did not allow my uncles and aunts to listen to Egyptian radio, especially during the 60s when the war was going on. She said that the Egyptian radio was lying and it was propaganda and would not give them the correct information about the history of Israel. She required, as an Egyptian woman, a full-blooded Egyptian woman speaking Arabic, required my uncles and aunts and my father to listen to Israeli radio. Because my grandmother was a godly woman who knew the truth and would not allow people that she was raising up to hear a lie. It's an incredible, 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 incredible piece of heritage and history that I have. Think about that for a second.
Whatever. There was no national consciousness. There was nothing to form the consciousness about. In the 20th century, the Arab world and the Palestinians and their supporters in the West, among the intellectual elites, basically erased history and recreated a fake history.
Can I go back and repeat what he just said? They erased history and created a new history, a fake history. That's what the devil does. He is a liar, and he is the father of lies.
Elites basically erased history and recreated a fake history that deracinates the Jewish roots that are unparalleled. There is no other story in the history of nations where people fought for so long for their land, for 2,000 years, were dispossessed from it, came back to it, did not kick out an existing population with a national consciousness, rebuilt the land, and now are being told you have no connections to it. You were, you're the colonials. No, we're not. We're not just to give this, just to give us a fine point, because this is so crucial what we're discussing. And I discuss it at considerable length in my book because people are so ignorant of history. We are not the Belgians in the Congo.
Wow. We are not the Belgians in the Congo. If you don't know that reference, look it up. It's a powerful reference. Let's take a listen to what he continues to say.
Not the Dutch in Indonesia, okay? We're not the British in South Africa. We had been there all the time. We had been in the Congo. We had been, if you will, the equivalent in Indonesia. We were kicked out of the Congo, and nothing happened in the Congo. Nothing. No other people there, no development, nothing. Okay? Now we come back to our land, build it up, enable immigration from of Arabs, who are now called Palestinians, from neighboring lands, and they tell us, oh, you don't belong here. You dispossessed us.
Yeah, and by the way, I want to say this because this is really important. When he brings up, like, for example, the colonization by Great Britain of many areas in Africa, understand this. This is very, very important. When they came and did what they did, they came and they improved things. They changed things. That's not what happened here. You guys get that? That's not what took place here. BB is trying to explain that. It's not what the world says it is. They came and they did nothing except poop all over it. I think that's important. I think that context is an important context to be able to establish and be aware of. Look what he goes on to say.
Palestinians from neighboring lands, and they tell us, oh, you don't belong here. You dispossessed us. This is essentially what Arab propaganda and Palestinian propaganda has done. And what I labored not only in the present book, my own history, BB My Story, but in a previous book, A Place Among the Nations, to debunk. And you know what? The interesting thing is this, so far, it's quite amazing. No fact that I put forward in any of these books has ever been challenged.
Yeah.
Not one.
Yep. He's right about that, folks. He's absolutely right. No fact that he has put in those books have ever been challenged. You want to know why? Because his history is accurate. The man is not wrong about what he asserts concerning what happened in history. He's absolutely right. There is nothing about that. So what is the history? What actually happened? There's a lot here. By the way, we have extensively gone through biblical history. If you want a really good lesson on Jewish biblical history, then I would recommend you go to the study that I did last night, where I went through part 6 of our Through the Bible series, a 20-part prophetic Bible series. We went through Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. Those are what we call post-exilic books. And I went through early biblical history, which was really good. But what I want you to do is listen to BB talking about what the real history sounds like, what it really looks like. Let's take a listen to what he says. This is unbelievable. Coming out of the mouth of the prime minister. It's pretty powerful when you hear it. Here it is.
Herzl was what I call our modern Moses, but I'd actually start with the original Moses. The Jewish people have lived in the land of Israel, what is now the state of Israel, have lived here and have been attached to this place for about 3,500 years, 3.5 millennia. Now, for the first 2 millennia, roughly, of that time, we were living in what is described in a text commonly known as the Bible. So the Bible describes how the Jewish people lived on this land, were attached to this land, fought off conquerors, sometimes were conquered, but stayed on their land. And that continued for a very long time until roughly the 6th, 7th century, actually, after the birth of Christ, okay? For roughly 2,000 years. We were conquered by the Romans, we were conquered by the Byzantines. They did a lot of bad things to us, but they didn't really exile us, contrary to what people think, okay? The loss of our land actually occurred when the Arab conquest took place in the 7th century. The Arabs burst out from Arabia, and they did something that no other conqueror, not the Romans, not the Byzantines, not the Greeks before them, not Alexander the Great, nobody did before. They actually started taking over the land of the Jewish farmer. They brought in military colonies that took over the land. And gradually, over the next 2 centuries, the Jews became a minority in our land. So it is under the Arab conquest that the Jews lost their homeland. The Arabs were the colonials. The Jews were the natives dispossessed.
By the way, I just want to say this. When he talks about the Arabs being the colonials, this is a very, very important point. A lot of people don't recognize this. When we talk about the greatest propagators of slavery today. They're the same ones that did it back in the day when slavery was legal in the United States of America. It is the Arab Muslim. People don't recognize that. It's the Arab Muslim. People don't understand it. And I can tell you this right now, the Arab Muslims also support a whole lot of other evil things. Muhammad was a child exploiter. That sounds like a harsh, offensive thing to say, but we know that to be true. As a matter of fact, in Islam, that culture is a very welcome thing. So when he talks about the Arabs doing what they did, think about that for a second. Think about what he is saying. It's founded in truth. Everybody stipulates to what he's saying. Nobody is debating it. It's a very, very important moment.
Well, that happens in history. The Jews were dispossessed. We were flung to the far corners of the earth, suffered unimaginable suffering because we had no homeland. But we didn't disappear, and we never gave up the dream of coming back to our ancestral homeland. So generation after generation, the Jews could be in Warsaw, they could be in Yemen, they could be in China. And they said, next year in Jerusalem, we'll come back, next year in Jerusalem. Well, that was made possible because the Arabs who had conquered the land basically left it barren.
Let me rewind it, guys. I muted him on accident. Let me rewind it so you guys can hear it.
China. And they said, next year in Jerusalem, we'll come back, next year in Jerusalem. Well, that was made possible because the Arabs who had conquered the land basically left it barren. They never made it their own. It was a barren land. It really had, practically, it was an empty land. And in the 19th century, the idea of coming back next year in Jerusalem became a reality. By the way, in part because of Christian Zionist support for the idea of the Great Return. The Jews came back in the 19th century to the land of Israel. The result of this return was that we started building farms, factories, places of employment. Arabs from nearby countries started immigrating, and they call themselves Palestinians. They reconstructed history and said, we've been here for centuries. No, they haven't. They weren't there at all, and they didn't have a national consciousness. We came back, made it our land, and we said, okay, we now will live together. We decided to establish a state in 1948, that's 75 years ago, and we said everybody can live here. The Arabs said there can't be a Jewish state. You have no right to be here. It's our land. It's not your land. It's been our land for 3,500 years. If you took over somebody's apartment, knocked them out, dispossessed them, and they never gave up the claim, they said it's our claim, and you left this barren dump, okay? And the families, the progeny of the people you kicked out, came back, rebuilt the house. You cannot come back and tell them, you don't belong here, we're gonna kick you out, especially since you're latecomers who've come to live in part of the house, which is what the so-called Palestinians are, okay? We say to them, you can live here, we can live here, but it's our land, it's our state.
Why is that such a hard thing for people to understand? God made the declaration. Look, this is what's happening. People are going to keep poking and poking and poking and poking and poking, and eventually Israel is going to wake up. They're beginning to. The sleeping giant is about to wake up, and when he does, he's going to unleash. Look what he continues to say.
And the reason this conflict continues is because the Palestinians, who represent the colonial powers, the Arab conquest of the Middle East and beyond, they are saying, you have no right for a Jewish state. Well, we do. If any people has any right to a state, if any people never gave up their dreams of returning to their ancestral home, if any people rebuilt their home from nothing, from barren, wasted land, it's the Jewish people. To tell them, you have suffered more than anyone else. You have never lost your dream of coming back and rebuilding your national life in your ancestral homeland. You have no right to be there. But the Arabs who are trying to destroy you, they have that right. That is a complete perversion of history and also a complete perversion of justice. The Jews belong to this land belongs to the Jews. The Palestinians are free to live here next to us, among us, but they're not free to demand the dissolution of the Jewish state. That is not justice. That is injustice.
I could not agree with the man more. I just think that there is a level of brilliance, not only in his communication skills, but in the very facts that he continues to be telling us. Everything that he is saying is based on truth, folks. Look, for those of you that want to get into more history, understand, history gives us a great indication of what had happened if you look at it correctly. Do you understand? By the way, Eric Messon, thank you. Do you guys understand something? Look, this is very important. I want to reemphasize this because I'm going to reinforce it with what BB says here. Do you understand that the Bible actually tells us that God designed the land of Israel? It's prophetic. Do you understand that? It's all over the place. The Bible tells us that God designed the land of Israel to only prosper when it's in the possession of his ancestrally chosen people, the Jews. Did you know that? Some of you might not know the Bible passages that deal with that, but the Bible specifically and uniquely touches up on that. I've talked about it before. The Bible makes it very, very clear. God made it clear. He will not bless the fruit of the land of Israel. He will not. He won't. Unless his people are occupying it. People don't know that. That is a Bible prophecy given to us. The prime minister of Israel might not even know that. But based on what he's about to tell us, you put that together and you're going to recognize very, very quickly, that Bible prophecy is coming to life. Look at what he says here. This is pretty powerful.
Jesus, right? Jesus was a Jewish rabbi living in...
Let me rewind that. Here we go.
You're familiar with the story of Jesus, right? Jesus was a Jewish rabbi living in 2,000 years ago. He was a rabbi from the Galilee, okay? He came to Jerusalem. He turned the money tables of the tables of the money changers on the Temple Mount. Where did that happen? Did it happen in Tibet? It happened here. Jerusalem was our capital. King David made it our capital 3,000 years ago. So the Jews are here. To try to say that they weren't here and that the Palestinians were here thousands of years ago is ridiculous. Anybody who can, you can actually Google this and find out how absurd this thing is. So as far as reinventing ancient history, that is unpardonable, because anybody can find out and understand that the Jews were here for thousands of years, the Palestinians weren't here. As far as modern times are concerned, what the Palestinians have said is, and I write this in my book, and I show it because it's so comical. What they say is, we were here, Palestine was a verdant land in the 19th century, teeming with the Palestinians, until the Jews came in, took it over and threw it out. Okay, well, that's what Arafat effectively said in his infamous speech in the United Nations, blaming Zionism, equating Zionism with racism.
Which, by the way, people don't know this, but Arafat, if you come from my country, or the country my mom and dad were born and raised in, and you speak Arabic like I do, and you hear Arafat speak, you realize right away that Arafat was an Egyptian. You want to talk about this guy who says, I'm a Palestinian and I have my Palestinian identity, we've always been here. No. You talk like an Egyptian, walk like an Egyptian, function like, you are an Egyptian, Arafat. He claimed to be the leader of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. He himself was not as he describes himself. You guys see the fraud? You guys see the fraud? Think about that. Ira, thank you. And yeah, you're right. It's the original sleeping giant. This is crazy. This is insane. Understand what's at risk here, folks. You need to understand what we're looking at. Understand the fact that lies continue to be told concerning a very serious issue. Lies are continuing to be told regarding things that most people don't have an education concerning. And this is part of how Satan exploits. This is how it gets done. Listen to what he continues to say.
Well, there's only one problem with that. He said that the Jewish invasion of this verdant Palestinian homeland happened in 1881, okay? The problem with that is that 12 years before, a famous visitor, among hundreds of visitors, named Mark Twain, visited the Holy Land. And he describes a totally different picture. He describes Palestine, I'm quoting him, is a vast wasteland. He said, only imagination can grace this barren land with the pomp of circumstance and life. It's just, he said, we traveled for a whole day. We didn't see, in the Galilee, we didn't see a human being, one single human being. He said, Jerusalem sits in sackcloth and ashes. And as he was saying that, it's the Jewish return that began building the land. Well, perhaps one could argue, it's obvious that Mark Twain was not in the service of the Jewish state because it didn't exist. He wasn't in the service of the Jewish lobby because there wasn't any Jewish lobby. He was just reporting what was there. Could there possibly have been a tremendous influx of Palestinians between 1869 and 1881, the year that Arafat says the Jewish invasion began and destroyed the Palestinian paradise?
The answer to that is no way. No way. Couldn't have happened. Hold the line. Thank you so much. You say you've learned so much from this channel in the past couple of years. You're very welcome. God bless you. This is crazy. Ronald Hofmeister is helping to prove my point. Ronald says, James, I'm 72 years old. Right away, when you hear somebody say, I'm 72 years old, understand they're part of the most valuable people in our society. He says, I'm 72 years old and have ADHD and I remember everything my mother said about 1929, the Great Depression. Mother said there was no cash. You had to use special stamps to buy anything. He's helping to prove my point. What people don't realize is the events of what happened in 1929 actually was one of the most contributory variables to World War II as we know it. When you have people like that man telling us these stories, we can prevent history from repeating itself. But unfortunately, history is about to repeat itself yet again. Okay, let's listen to what Bibi continues to say.
Well, alas, no, because in the year 1881, another famous visitor visits Israel, and he visits this land, and he writes also his memoirs, okay? His name was Arthur Penrhyn Stanley. He was a very famous courtier of Queen Victoria's court, okay? And he came here on a special visit. And he says, I looked south and I looked north. He says, I'm in Judea. And I see nothing. He says, a barren expanse. And they both express, both Twain and Arthur Penrhyn Stanley say the same thing. When will the Jews come back and bring this land to life? And the answer is right then. We came back, brought it back to life. There were Arabs living here, but it was, as I say, a barren wasteland. But Arabs began to immigrate naturally because we created a rise in the standard of living that attracted Arabs from neighboring states. Those Arabs are now the descendants of those Arabs who migrated as a result of the Jewish return. Many of them now are considered Palestinians. So what I'm saying...
By the way, and the ones that continue to be a part of the Jewish state as productive Jewish citizens are multimillionaires. Multimillionaires. Living well. The ones that continue to resist they're making a miserable life for themselves. Think about that.
And I'm saying this to you, Jordan, and to your audience. There has been a complete fabrication of history. It's the biggest lie of the big lies that have permeated the 20th century and the 21st century, is to say that the Arabs were here before, that is, the Palestinians were here before the Jews, when we were here for thousands of years, that we are the colonials, when in fact it was the Arabs who were the colonials, who dispossessed the original natives, and that is the Jews, that we came back to this land that was laid barren by the Arab conquest, brought it back to life, and allowed Arab immigration, what we call now Palestinian immigration, to come back in. And now they say to us, in unimaginable chutzpah, they say, you don't belong here. They recreate ancient history, they recreate modern history, and this is a lot of hokum. It's ridiculous.
Boy, is he right about that. Look, I wish people could better understand the intricacies of everything that we are talking about here. I wish people could recognize more clearly and discern more effectively what the real thing is really happening. The enemy is good at what he does, folks. He is a liar. And he will do whatever he can to blind the people. It's amazing. By the way, waiting on the Lord, I assume you're watching the stream kind of at the beginning right now, but by the time you hear this, I just want to thank you. You say, Pastor James, saw the movie Sound of Freedom. Me and my wife have no kids. We are compelled to help get more children back from the demons in this world exploiting them. Have no idea where to start or who to talk to. Get a hold of ATP Ministries, All Things Possible Ministries. They are the number one ministry that I encourage people to support for this. All Things Possible Ministries. Very, very important. Great ministry to get behind. Victor Marks and his team are number one in this area. They are the best at delivering children from child exploitation. They don't get better than him and his team. I would support them. Folks, let's put a summary on the matter. How about we just do that? We are running out of time rapidly, so let me just say this. We are at a place right now in society and in this world where truth has been abandoned. Truth has been abandoned because of demonic influence and demonic action. And the flesh doesn't like the truth, because if you confront your flesh with the truth, your tendency will be to act in a way that denies the flesh, and the flesh doesn't like it. The god of this world, Satan, wants to blind people all over and cause them to think that right is wrong and wrong is right. No more. Mark my words when I say this, folks. The sleeping giant that is Israel is awakening. And when Israel awakes, I can just promise you this, it's not going to be pretty for her enemies. Even when the enemies of Ezekiel 38 attack Israel and Israel has no ability to be able to defend itself, we know that God will defend Israel. I think it's time to wake up. Look at what's going on right now in the world around us. Look at what's happening in the Middle East. Look at what's taking place in Western and Eastern Europe. Look at what's taking place in the United States of America. Look everywhere. We see evidence everywhere that Christ could come at any moment. It's time to take this stuff seriously, folks. We are undoubtedly approaching the last day. And it is time to recognize and understand that more than ever, we need to shed light on the darkness. We need to speak the truth where no truth is being spoken. People tell me all the time, well, Pastor James, how can I get involved? How can I fight? You open your mouth. You speak. You tell the truth. Oh, there'll be a consequence for doing that, but there's also a reward, because God blesses those who dedicate themselves to speaking the truth. All right, let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you, Lord, for this time. You are so good and faithful to us, Lord. We thank you for the time that we've been able to gather together in your name to learn more of you. Help us, Lord, to open up our eyes, Lord, and to see what it is, Lord, that you are wanting to do in our lives and in our hearts. We love you, Father. We thank you. We pray that you would go before us now. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. We had a question earlier about faith and works. Go to my series on James, particularly all the studies in chapter 2. I think you'll be very blessed by it. You don't want to miss that. I did a lot of work on that particular subject. I guarantee you're probably going to hear some things you haven't heard anymore about that passage, and hopefully it will actually bless you. The 501c3 thing, I just wanted to just quickly circle back to that. Understand this, folks. Churches do not have to apply for exemption because by statute, according to our government, churches are already exempt. Kind of an interesting thing there. So the 501c3 thing can turn into a major trap for a lot of reasons. But just understand, churches have a whole lot more rights in this country than a lot of people think. And if we get to the point as a church where we stop defending those rights, we have a bigger problem on our hands. So I just wanted to say that, kind of a note on the end, because I know there were some questions and some things that came in regarding that issue, and I didn't want to sort of walk away from that. Dale, thanks for the reminder on that. All right, folks, I have already put up the locals session. We will be on locals in about 5 minutos. We'll take some questions, and we'll go from there. Love you guys. Pray for us, by the way. I think today Monkey and I are going to be recording an episode of Countdown to Eternity, folks. It's going to be a good one. All right? Love you guys. God bless you. Keep fighting the good fight.